You are listening to episode 71 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the podcast and website for modern, secular application of early Buddhist thought. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the companion website has show notes for each episode, along with resource materials on Buddhism, critical thinking, science, secularism, and skeptical thought. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Carol Tavris speaks with us about how cognitive dissonance can lead to unhealthy conceptual attachments. Fairly frequently, I get email from listeners asking for recommendations on books that have been particularly helpful with practice. Often, there is an interest in books that are more secular in nature, and I'm happy to ask a few questions about what the listener might be looking for and try to come up with recommendations from the resources page on the website that might be helpful to their particular situation. One book I recommend, and often mention on the podcast, is not a Buddhist book at all. And yet, it's in my top 5 list of those most helpful. The book is Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me: Why We Justify Foolish Beliefs, Bad Decisions, and Hurtful Acts by Carol Tavris and Elliot Aronson. It's about cognitive dissonance, the holding of different and conflicting ideas in our mind, and what we normally do in these common situations. This entire concept is examined with tremendous insight and explained with great clarity. As meditators, part of our practice is trying to see through these self-delusions we build, and this book can help to focus the attention on what we may be doing off the cushion without even being aware of it. One thing I would like to also suggest is that you make a point of taking a look at the episode page on the website for this interview, as I've included an extensive set of quotes from the book you may find interesting. One of the authors joins us today. Carol Tavris is a social psychologist, writer, and lecturer whose goal is to promote psychological science and critical thinking in improving our lives. Her other major books include the landmark Anger, the Misunderstood Emotion, a book well known for its critical look at unvalidated notions about the inevitability of anger and the need to ventilate it, and how anger can be best expressed constructively. She is also author of the award-winning The Mismeasure of Woman: Why Women Are Not the Better Sex, the Inferior Sex, or the Opposite Sex, and co-author of 2 widely used textbooks for introductory psychology. She is a Fellow of the American Psychological Association, a Charter Fellow of the Association for Psychological Science, and a member of the editorial board of the APS journal Psychological Science in the Public Interest. In honor of Skepticon, which is going on this weekend at Convergence, sit back, relax, and have a nice buzzed Aldrin. And our guest today is Carol Tavris. Carol, thank you so much for being here.
A pleasure indeed, Ted.
So I've been telling the audience that I've been looking forward to speaking with you for quite some time since I heard you speak at the amazing meeting last year in Las Vegas. And I look forward to, I understand you're going to be speaking there again this year.
This is a true thing. I'm looking forward to it very much. It was a great meeting, wasn't it?
It was. It always does. That's why it's the amazing meeting. One of many reasons it's the amazing meeting. Now, what do you know what you're going to be talking about this upcoming meeting?
No, I don't. In fact, there are a few possibilities, and I'm just going to be talking with the conference organizers about what it will be in particular. So
Great.
just have to tune in and see what turns up.
Absolutely. I look forward to seeing you there. So today we are here to speak about a book which I recommend on a weekly basis to people on a particular topic that crops up, I think, a great deal because there's so little awareness of what it is, and it's so very important to clear thinking about things. So we're here to talk about the topic of cognitive dissonance. The book that you co-authored with Elliot Aronson, is that correct?
Yes.
Was Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me. Why We Justify Foolish Beliefs, Bad Decisions, and Hurtful Acts.
Exactly.
So what I'd like you to do is, if you would, introduce us to the topic of cognitive dissonance by telling us about Leon Festinger.
Absolutely. Well, I will, and I might even start with one of Leon Festinger's first studies. This was hardly a great scientific study, but it was a lovely little observational study that's quite relevant now. It was his first book called When Prophecy Fails. Has this happened recently in our own experience, one wonders, with prophecies of the end of the world that do not come true? And the thing that was of interest to Festinger was, why is it when the prophecy fails that people don't say, my God, was I stupid? I sold my house, I sold the car, I gave away my chickens, I have nothing left here, and what an idiot I was to follow this person who said the world was going to end. Mm-hmm. They do not. And so he joined this little doomsday cult, which believed the world was going to come to an end on December 21st of that year, and the woman who led it, Mrs. Marion Keech, and they're all going to be swept up in a spaceship and taken off and saved while the planet was going to be destroyed. I love that the woman's husband went to sleep at 10 o'clock and left a whole little group waiting in the living room for the end of the world, but he thought he'd get a good night's sleep. Anyway, so of course when the world didn't end at 2 a.m. and the spaceship didn't arrive, what to do? What did they do? Mm-hmm. And what they did was, after much soul-searching and anxiety and worry and fussing, what they came out with, what the woman leader, who was called Mrs. Keech, said, was that thanks to the devotion and prayers of this believing little group, the world had been spared. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now, that kind of study was one of the most fascinating elements of Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance. Namely, the theory was very simple and elegant in its basic premise. It is uncomfortable for the human mind to hold two dissonant or conflicting cognitions at the same time, or a cognition attitude and a behavior. And of course the classic example is the smoker. A smoker who knows that smoking is bad for your health has to do one of two things. Has to quit smoking so that the behavior is consonant with this knowledge, or has to justify smoking so that you keep smoking but change the cognition that smoking is dangerous. You minimize it, you decide there are actually many benefits to smoking, your life may be shorter but you'll be thinner, mm-hmm. whatever it might be. So the point about cognitive dissonance was this, that it's psychologically uncomfortable as being hungry or thirsty. We are motivated to reduce it. We don't live comfortably with dissonance. And that the way that we choose to reduce dissonance will usually be done in a way that makes us feel good about ourselves. What Elliot Aronson did, Elliot was his graduate student at Stanford all those years ago, and Elliot advanced the theory into one of self-justification, in which he showed that, it's dissonant if your best friend loves Woody Allen movies and you hate Woody Allen movies. You're going to really argue with that friend to try to get that person to see how foolish he or she is to think that way about Woody Allen when you have a different point of view. But it's not important. It's trivial. It's a kind of dissonance you could easily live with. You could say, right. Okay, my friend is my friend even though they are an idiot about movies. That's what you do. But when the dissonance is about something really crucial to our self-concept, Eliot showed, then we will reduce the dissonance in a way to preserve our self-concept. So, if you see yourself as someone who is really competent, a good person, an ethical person, a smart person, a skeptical person, a scientific person, I'm a great doctor, I'm a great lawyer, I'm a great lover, I'm a great human being. And now you are confronted with clear evidence that you've held a belief that is wrong. New scientific evidence shows it's just plain wrong, or that you did something that was foolish, you were taken in by a hoax, or that you did something at work that was incompetent, you just really blew it in that particular assignment, or whatever it might be. Now, you are in a very uncomfortable state of dissonance. Your choice is between saying, boy, I really did something stupid, foolish, incompetent, unethical, and wrong, or, and what can I do about that? How do I make amends about that? Or, you dismiss the evidence, you attack the messenger, you decide the evidence isn't really persuasive after all, you blame the other person, and so forth. In this way, you get to keep seeing yourself as a good, kind, ethical person and dismiss the evidence that should suggest you're not. See, it's the reason, as we say in the book, that everybody can see a hypocrite in action except a hypocrite. There was Newt Gingrich going on about Bill Clinton having an affair in the White House. Well, he himself was doing exactly the same thing. Okay, so dissonance. Did Newt Gingrich not feel any dissonance about this? Probably not. Probably what he was doing was justifying his own affair in whatever way. I can't read his mind. I have no idea how he did it. But it might have been something like, well, Bill Clinton was having sex in the Oval Office. I'm just doing it here in my own shop. It's not that serious.
Yeah.
I don't know what but that's what people do. They see themselves as the exceptions. So the importance of understanding dissonance is twofold. One, as a theory, it really encompasses all that we are learning about the non-rational ways that the mind processes information. We aren't rational in the way we process information. We are rationalizing. And for skeptics, skeptics, for anybody living in the world, it would be good to be able to accept dissonant information when it leads us to improving ourselves, improving our work, improving our relationships, living by better understanding of health findings and so forth, instead of dismissing information that we just don't want to hear. And that's the reason that we wrote this book. One of the most exciting things to us has been hearing from people who say, which we believe strongly too, this is one of the really strong replicated findings in psychology that when you know how it works, literally immediately helps you in your everyday life. There are a lot of things we can't do with, we're fond of saying, an optical illusion. You can't do anything about optical illusions, but you can do something about the cognitive illusions that we have once we become aware of them. And that was the passionate feeling that brought us to writing this book.
Well, and it's been very effective, too, in that the awareness that for those of us who are practicing meditators, we look at what's happening in the mind. We close out ourselves to other distractions, and we are supposed to, at least, be looking as honestly and truthfully in what comes up in our minds. And yet, we see that may not always be the case, that when we get off the cushion, we are every bit as human as when we got on the cushion. And as you do point out in the book, that MRI scans show that the reasoning area of the brain shuts down when confronted with dissonant information. We still have that challenge, and yet we're able to, and this is also one of the things that you say in the book, is that we also have this misperception that we can't change our minds, which is in conflict with what we see now in studies on brain plasticity and moment-by-moment attention awareness. We are able to change our minds in a very positive way.
Exactly.
One of the things I thought was just very timely when I was rereading the book and going through the section on Leon Festinger and his experiences with an end of the world prediction is how very timely this is, because we're recording this about a week after the world was supposed to have ended. We were supposed to have had the rapture, rather, about a week ago on the 21st. And this is Harold Camping's prediction, which, again, because he made the same prediction in 1994, didn't happen. And we're seeing exactly what you describe in the book, that instead of going, I was wrong, and everyone saying, I blew it, I gave away my savings, I spent all this money in these big billboards, though what good that would have done, I don't know. Mm-hmm. And instead of saying the honest thing and saying, yep, I done wrong, now we have the special pleading. Like, well, there was something happened, but, we were spared that, and really now the world's going to end in October, 5 months later, which is when the world was supposed to end. So, see, I didn't do anything wrong. Right.
Yeah, just moving the goalposts.
Right. Exactly.
That's what all failed religious predictions do. Well, I miscalculated the numbers. I looked at the wrong chapter in the Bible. It should be, Thursday instead of Monday. It should have been next year instead of this year. Yeah, that's the common way. See, notice the underlying point here, which is that the more important the central belief is to a person, the more likely they will maintain that belief in the face of disconfirming evidence by tweaking the disconfirming evidence in some way. And in this respect, we are all Harold Camping. We all have a little Harold Camping in us. All of us have some thing that we've invested a lot of time and money and energy and passion in, and we will do a lot to maintain that conviction and that belief. It might be a personal one about our abilities or skills. I have no cognitive dissonance when someone tells me I'm a lousy cook, because I know I'm a lousy cook. This does not cause me to suffer in any way, okay? But a great cook who makes a bad dinner, we all say, the burners weren't working. I mean, not necessarily a great cook will say, everybody has an off night. But you get the point. If it's not of central importance to you, it's very easy to be open-minded.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And so the point is not so much to make fun of the Harold Campings of the world, but to understand that the mechanism driving them is one that we all share to one extent or another, or in some domain or another, which is a humbling realization. I think everybody experiences cognitive dissonance except Elliot Aronson. I tease him about this mercilessly. I say, have you never been wrong? He says, no, maybe once in 1981.
Not yet.
No, not yet. But he actually is very skilled at both understanding how dissonance works, knowing when it's likely to occur. You see, after we make a decision about anything, buying a car, buying a house, taking a job, whatever decision, from small to large, buying a toaster, we're going to want to justify that decision. We're going to start looking for all the good things about the decision and pay no attention to good things about the choice we didn't make.
Yeah.
See? Because we want to keep it consonant. Well, that's normal. That's fine. That's what keeps us from suffering buyer's remorse. People who do suffer buyer's remorse are having trouble reducing dissonance, you see. So dissonance is beneficial. The reason for cognitive dissonance, you mentioned the brain studies. Well, yeah, it's in there in the way so many of our mental mechanisms are in there. We now even know that other primates, rhesus monkeys and chimps, will show post-decision dissonance. They'll prefer the color of an object they chose to the color of the object they didn't choose. I mean, there's something really interesting about this. But, and this is a huge but and very important for meditation and for the work that you do and the ideas that we share. And that's this. The fact that something is in the brain does not mean it can't be affected or controlled or shaped. I feel really strongly about this. Everywhere you go, somebody waving a brain scan at you as if that means something. And, sometimes it does. Sometimes it does if you find some abnormality in the brain. But most of the time, it's just brain waving, It's sort of a veneer of science. What's interesting about dissonance is precisely that We can control it. We can control the cognitions. Once we are aware of how this works, we absolutely can take steps. Instead of reducing dissonance in a brainless, mindless way, the path of least resistance justifying the mistake that we made, we can stop ourselves short and say, hold on here. This is really interesting information.
Mm-hmm.
How do I accept this information, learn from this information, change my behavior so that I don't repeat the same mistake in the future? In my experience, when someone says to you, hey, you know that quarrel we've been having for the last 27 years? I've thought about it, and you're right, and I'm completely wrong. Mm-hmm. This almost never gets a bad response.
Very rarely.
Very rarely, right? You know? So people often are afraid to fess up, to admit a mistake, to change direction, because they feel their self-esteem will be threatened, or they feel they've invested too much in that course of action. And it's often so liberating to say, this was a wrong turn, this was a mistake.
You know, we often go into this idea of the statement, what's done is done. And that's true, that's in the past, but the future, if we've learned nothing from the Terminator movies, we should learn, no fate, the future is not done. We can change what we do each and every moment. And you say this very well in the book. I'm going to read one of your quotes back to you in this brilliance. This was you, so good job.
Okay.
But this does not mean that we are doomed to keep striving to justify our actions after the fact. Like Sisyphus, never reaching the top of the hill of self-acceptance. A richer understanding of how and why our minds work as they do is the first step toward breaking the self-justification habit. And that in turn requires us to be more mindful of our behavior and the reasons for our choices. And that is just so beautifully said, because it's essentially saying that we're not locked in. We're able to make this change in ourselves, but we need to be aware of it first. And that's what one of the books has done a wonderful job of putting a spotlight on that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your comments so much. Elliot makes a very important point, I think, in this, which is the first step when we're aware of having done wrong, harmed another person, done something foolish and so forth. He says you don't want to just jump to, okay, I made a mistake, let's put it behind us, what's done is done, it's over. Okay, because that's called that's the hot potato way of resolving it, which is just fess up and get on with things and don't think about it. Well, that's behind the fake apologies we're hearing in the news all the time. I'm not really an anti-Semite. I'm not really a racist. I'm not really a homophobic pig. Really, I'm a fine person. I'm so sorry if I offended. I love this. If I offended anybody, the reason you're there apologizing is you offended half the planet. But okay, if you offended anybody, so and the reason we don't like it is that we know it's fake. We understand from the whole language of this false apology that the person hasn't gotten it, didn't get what it was that was so racist and offensive and obnoxious, okay? But they just want to make the problem go away.
Right.
And so a quick apology when the person does not take the time to really understand what went wrong, what did you do that really hurt the other person? What did you do that was really the mistake here? Without that ability to reflect on it, to think about it, to put the self-defensiveness aside, put the self aside, and look at the action, look at the words, look at the mistake, and say, okay, I get it. We had I had a wonderful experience with a man in an audience where I'd been lecturing who, at the end of the talk, he said, I want to tell you my own story and my own experience with your book. He said, my family and I, it was a large number of siblings, and they had been at war over some family inheritance question. It doesn't matter what the reason is. It was a family rift. Everybody knows about family rift. So some siblings were on one side and some were on the other side, and they had been fighting for 7 years about whatever this was, okay, these two sides. He said, when your book came out, I gave it to the mediator, and I said, give this book to them so they can see what they are doing wrong. Okay? I mean, that was kind of the gist of it. He said, boy, this is so interesting. I want them to see this chapter on perpetrators and victims so that they will understand their part in creating this rift. He said, this didn't work. He said, and then a month ago, I reread your book, and I called the mediator, and I said, tell them that now I understand what I have done wrong. How sorry I am for the things I did and the things I said, and how wrong I was to insist on this. And he just looked inward and was able to see his own role in contributing to the rift. And the minute he did that, his siblings were able to do the same. Mm-hmm. And that's the heart of this, that instead of always looking for an outside excuse or for blame, if we can see our part in our own life story, this is the beginning of reconciliation, of healing, and of change.
Absolutely. You know, that's I have had a very similar circumstance where made me write down that there is sincere and insincere acknowledgement of personal flaw. The distinction is that the first is designed to continue investigation of the problem and actively engage with the process of corrective practice. The other is designed to simply end the uncomfortable truth of criticism, which preserves the problem. Mm-hmm. And seeing which choice we're making, that may be the hardest first step. What are we actually doing here?
Exactly. No, I think you've just said it very beautifully. The question is to determine in the beginning, what is the goal here? What is it we want to accomplish? How do we get there? What's in the way?
Yeah, exactly. Now, I also wanted to ask you about, because I think this is a nice tie-in to what we're talking about now, the virtuous circle. Mm-hmm. As we're talking about moving things in a more positive direction, when we do make that step and we do see our own human fallibility, and we know that we've made an oops, and this is a bad thing. You tell a story, and this is very much related, and you cover this quite well in the book, on repressed memories, and actually false repressed memories of abuse in children, and that there, of the vast field of people in the mental health profession who had uncovered these repressed memories and stories of abuse, when faced with the possibility, likelihood, or perhaps fact of having created those memories, events that didn't actually occur, there was really only one person who stepped forward and saw the light and took corrective action. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that's not the same as the virtuous circle, which
no, but we'll
get there.
Suspend the virtuous circle for a moment.
All right, suspend the virtuous circle.
We'll work on the parallelogram of deceit.
Okay, a parallelogram. The story that we tell about recovered memory is a story of what happens in a profession in which there is a closed loop of evidence, where you have a set of beliefs that cause you to see in the behavior of your client confirmation of what it is that you believe, which in turn confirms your belief, and in no place in this cycle are you able to entertain another explanation for the client's problems or the client's behavior. So if, for example, a woman comes to see you and she's got eating disorders, and you say, gee, I read somewhere that women who have eating disorders have been sexually abused, you say, well, have you been sexually abused? And the woman says, no, actually I haven't. And you say, well then, but we know that women with eating disorders have all been sexually abused, therefore you must be repressing the memory of having been sexually abused. So you are excluding the possibility of any other reason for her eating disorder, including living in a culture that has an absurd notion of how women should look. Or peer pressure, or being an adolescent, or reading women's magazines. Okay, so this is what happened during the hysterical epidemic of repressed memories in this country, in which so many people were harmed by this notion that came from so many therapists, originally with every good intention of eradicating the problem of the sexual abuse of children, but it got wildly out of hand, where they were diagnosing sexual abuse in everybody who came to see them with any problem. And when you have people say, as the authors of Courage to Heal said, if you can't remember being sexually abused, you probably were, you have the epitome of a preposterous statement, because there is then no way to disconfirm your hypothesis that this woman was sexually abused. See, what dissonance theory, one of the great contributing findings in dissonance theory is that one of the most deep-seated biases of the human mind is called the confirmation bias. It's the mind's disposition to notice, observe, and remember anything that agrees with us or with our belief, and to dismiss any information that is dissonant and discrepant. So you can see right away why science is so difficult. Science is one of the best methods we have that forces us to put our beliefs to the test and forces us to confront disconfirming, dissonant evidence, the kind we don't want to hear. Okay? So the problem for many psychotherapists who are not well trained in the methods of science, who don't understand what science is for, who don't understand what a control group is for, who don't understand how you test a hypothesis, is that they can easily get caught up in a fad and bring that fad into their practice, see it in their clients, cause their clients then to accept that explanation, and pretty soon they're both in a little dance, the two of them, in which there's no way to break out of it. Certainly not all psychotherapists are this way. I want to hasten to add that many clinical psychologists, particularly those who practice cognitive behavior therapy, which is based on very good empirical studies, and mindfulness meditation, by the way, based on good clinical and empirical evidence.
We like evidence. We like studies.
We like studies. Studies are good. Some kinds of therapy, people can go to therapy that is not an empirically validated therapy for purposes of improving their morale and getting good advice and so forth, and you can't really measure those things. But what that kind of therapy might do, it's not that that empirical studies are necessary for good kind counseling, but they are necessary to prevent a therapist from a dangerous fad like rebirthing or attachment therapies, which are so desperately harmful to so many participants. So that's the danger. So there you are, you're a therapist, you believe in repressed memories, you believe that a memory is buried in you like a turnip or a potato, and it's your job to dig it up, and that you'll dig it up in some pristine fashion. Well, this reflects an appalling ignorance of how memory works, an appalling ignorance of trauma, and of recovery from trauma. So our concern in the book was to show how so many well-meaning therapists set off down the wrong path of believing this particular fad that was, multiple personality disorder, repressed memory, and so forth, and then found themselves so far along the path that they couldn't turn back. They couldn't say, oh my God, how wrong I was. The one therapist we talk about in the book, she's hardly the only therapist in the world, I'm sure, who came to this realization, but there sure has been a loud silence from the therapeutic world of those practitioners who fomented this pernicious belief.
And you say in the book, the scientific method consists, and this is one reason I keep bringing up the scientific method during the podcast, is it consists of the use of procedures designed to show us not that our predictions and hypotheses are right, but that they might be wrong. Scientific reasoning is useful to anyone in any job, or I would suggest to people listening to the podcast, in our meditation or daily practice, because it makes us face the possibility, even the dire reality, that we were mistaken. It forces us to confront our self-justifications, and that's what we're doing in our practice, is looking at what's actually going on here, not what we think is, not what we have created in our ego operating system, and put them on public display for others to puncture. Its core, therefore, science is a form of arrogance control. That was beautifully said.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think that's right, arrogance control. But you see, and I think this is one of the things that skeptics and scientists can really do in talking to the public. There's a great joy in scientific discovery. There's a great joy in learning that we're wrong about something that we thought was the case, and that we learn is not the case. For example, you take this terrible story of vaccines and autism, which was, started by this guy, Andrew Wakefield, so many years ago. He came up with this hypothesis. It wasn't that it was an unreasonable hypothesis, but it has been shown repeatedly over and over and over to be wrong. Nothing in the vaccines is causing children's autism.
And he falsified his data.
Yeah, and it was fraudulent data, by the way. Yeah, a complete fraud. And, my God. And what a medical disaster this is. Well, many people have put a lot of time and money and effort into the anti-vaccine campaign. They've achieved celebrity and fame and money and websites and Lord knows what else to keep that belief going. But if your goal really is to help your autistic child, if your goal really is to find out the causes of autism and what can be done about it, don't you think you'd want to say, wow, isn't it wonderful to learn that my vaccinating my child was not the reason my child became autistic? Now let me devote my time and money and effort and energy to finding out what might be the cause. And that's the attitude that would be so good if we could capture. Don't be embarrassed that you traveled the wrong path for a while. Learning that you were wrong is learning. We've learned something. We've learned something really important. Now let's go on to the next quest.
Let's move forward. Yeah, there's a terrific talk that I posted last week on the Facebook fan page for this that Catherine Schultz gave on being wrong. And she talks a great deal about how she makes a very compelling case for not just admitting, but embracing our fallibility. That good things come out of that, as you're saying, that we learn more and more accurately that way.
Oh, exactly. It's not a negative thing. It's a positive thing. I often say, in talking about our book, don't we want doctors to wash their hands? Don't we want to know things that can be done in hospitals to reduce the rate of error and illness caused in hospitals? Don't we want our criminal justice system to put the really guilty people away and let go of the innocent ones? For every innocent person in prison, there's some guilty person wandering around, Don't we want to catch that guilty person? So it really requires making people aware of the fact, we say this at the end of the book, the fact that I do something that is stupid, foolish, wrong, or harmful does not mean that I am a stupid, cruel, horrible person. It means I did something that was stupid, horrible, and foolish. It's not my soul and my nature we're talking about here. It's my particular behavior.
Yeah, you are not the action.
You are not the action. So let's put those in two different categories and say, when a person who wants to be good and kind and ethical does something that falls short of those things, I'm going to feel bad for a while, but now what can I do?
That happens.
What can I learn from? That happens.
And you use a great metaphor in the book talking about the pyramid, because as you were just saying, it's still good people who can make honest mistakes and be very much along the wrong path, one step at a time. Tell us about the pyramid metaphor.
I love the pyramid. This actually came from a study that had been done many years ago of cheating. The metaphor basically works like this. You take two people, imagine a pyramid, and you've got two people at the very top, and they have pretty much the same attitude on something, let's say cheating or taking illegal drugs or being married, whatever the issue is, they're pretty much alike, okay? Now they have to make a decision. Do I cheat or not cheat? Do I stay in this marriage or do I leave this marriage? Do I blow the whistle on my corrupt boss or do I shut my mouth and sit tight? You have to make a decision. The minute you make a decision, one decides one thing, and the other person decides a different thing. And now imagine them taking a step down the side of that pyramid. Each one of them will justify the decision they make. So the person who cheats says, well, I never thought cheating was a good thing or a bad thing, but, now that I've cheated, really it's not a big deal. Everybody cheats. This is no big issue at all. Whereas the one who resists cheating says, cheating is a serious crime. It's not a victimless crime. Everybody is harmed by it, and this is it's an awful thing. As they take further steps along the path of justifying that initial decision, it means that the next decision they make will continue along the same path, because otherwise they would have to admit they were wrong on that first little step they took off the pyramid. And so by the time these two people who were once so alike are at the bottom of the pyramid, at the base, they are as far apart from each other as they could be. The cheater thinks the non-cheater is a puritanical, prissy do-gooder, and the one who didn't cheat thinks the cheater, should be hung up by his ankles and flogged. That they now have attitudes that are very far apart from each other. They think that attitude is what they always believed, and they have become even more committed to the point of view that they've taken. And that's how it is. It means that it becomes harder and harder to go back up the pyramid and make corrective action. So one of the things we say is, how do you corrupt an innocent man? How do you corrupt a good man, a good woman? You just get them to take one small step off the pyramid. You offer them a small incentive to go in your direction rather than someone else's, and self-justification will do the rest for you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. And it's interesting because this, in part, you had told a story about how you and Elliot decided to write the book. And it was very much ties directly into the pyramid. I think it was some decisions that a former Bush president had made. Mm-hmm. And where that one, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we were interested at the time we were thinking about this. We were interested in George Bush's justifications for going into Iraq, when the original reason that he had told the country that this country had weapons of mass destruction and it could do, terrible harm to Europe and America. Now, there were no weapons of mass destruction. We now know from Bush's own insider reports and books that they cherry-picked the incoming information from the CIA and others to confirm what they wanted to believe. This is something we all do. We want to go into Iraq. We think there's weapons of mass destruction there. Who knows what their reasons really were for going in, but we made the decision to invade Iraq. Now let's find a reason for it. Okay, there's weapons of mass destruction. Well, there weren't. But instead of saying, gee, we were wrong to launch this war, they found new justifications for it. As, by the way, we would predict in Harold Camping's case, they're not going to give up a belief in their religion and the religious prediction. George Bush is not going to give up his belief that going into Iraq was the right thing to do. So instead, new justifications are found. And as we were talking about that, and Elliot said, well, people think that Bush was lying to the country. And he said, I don't think he was lying to the country. I think he was lying to himself. I think he was lying to himself. That's how self-justification works. I'm a good president. I'm the decider. I make these decisions. I do the right thing for my country. And okay, so we might have been wrong about the weapons of mass destruction, but you'll see history will show in 40 or 50 years this was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay? And those are the justifications that actually all of our presidents have made, not just Republican ones, but Everybody along the line has done this. And that's indeed how it works. So when national leaders engage in this inability to accept even dissonant information from members of their team that suggests a course of action might be wrong, the world can pay the price for it. When the rest of us do, it's got fewer consequences, but maybe no less serious for ourselves.
It is. They're still human beings and still subject to making mistakes. And the challenge, of course, is that they're in such a position of great power that mistakes, particularly ones that are avoidable, like ones of cognitive dissonance or confirmation bias, only seeing the data that you want to see that supports your view, is so very, very damaging when it takes us down an unfortunate hole. Tell us about Ben Franklin.
Ben Franklin and the virtuous circle. I love this. Well, of course, a vicious circle works this way. This is the usual thing we're used to. I am a good, kind person. I have now done this harm to another person. I've insulted them, or it's my little brother and I hit him, or whatever it is. I've harmed the other person. How could I, a good person, harm another person? Obviously, the other person deserved it. That's a bad person. That person was behaving badly. He started it. It's his fault. It's not my fault. He started it.
I've never done that with my brothers, ever.
Good for you. Good for you.
Fibbing a bit.
Market the reason that you didn't do that, and you'll win the Nobel Peace Prize. And but generally that's the impulse. Now, of course, what that does is, as soon as you're blaming the other person for starting this, that justifies your treatment of that person and causes you to persist in behaving that way. That's what a vicious circle is. It perpetuates aggression, blame of the other person, and more aggression. A virtuous circle, first observed by, indeed, Ben Franklin, is if I have an enemy and I do him a kindness, I ask him to do a kindness for me, he has to justify his kind action toward me, and he will justify it by deciding, I must be a pretty good person because, after all, he did me a kindness. And in this way, we set up a virtuous circle in which our reciprocal acts of kindness to each other escalate, because we're now justifying the act of kindness I've done for this person by saying that person must have deserved my act of kindness by being a pretty good guy after all.
Yeah, and he did it by loaning the person, getting the person to loan him
him a book, a rare book. Exactly right. Yeah. And he was one of his greatest enemies in politics, and they became close friends. I often think about this when I look at the U.S. Senate, and I think of how in the world Orrin Hatch and Ted Kennedy could have been such good friends. And probably one of the others did an act of kindness to the other. Who can say? But it's another example of the hopeful and positive and constructive use of the understanding of cognitive dissonance.
I think that's exactly how we want to look at this, and a great way to wrap up the interview is that once we see this in action, once we notice it, in particular in ourselves, because we can't always change what other people do, we can certainly start with our own awareness of our own cognitive dissonance and take steps to change, because that decision rests with us.
That decision rests with us is exactly the point. It's the moral of the story of that family rift I told you. We can't get the other side to see things how we do. We can't keep at them and bludgeoning them and yelling at them and blaming them and shouting at them we can only get them to change. Everything will be fine. What we can start with is by saying, what's my part in this? What can I do?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Been speaking with Carol Tavris. The book is Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me, Why We Justify Foolish Beliefs, Bad Decisions, and Hurtful Acts. I also wanted to mention that people can find more about this book on the website, which is www.mistakesweremadebutnotbyme.com. So please
That's right.
Go check it out. Carol, thank you so much for being here.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the companion website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com, and you'll find an entire web page devoted to this and every episode. There are also links to discussions about today's topic on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for the Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on the Secular Buddhist.